very good morning to you all for joining our regular EU Clusters talk. Today, we're going to be discussing how to revise the EU Public Procurement Directive, which is a strategic tool for Europe's competitiveness. Now, we all know that public procurement can really form a lever to help drive the economy, to help drive the competitiveness, and also to help drive the innovation that we want to see across the EU. Now, as part of her political objectives, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that there would be a revision of the EU's Public Procurement Directive. So we're going to look at that. It's all about strengthening Europe's strategic autonomy as well as creating added value. And we're going to look today at its implications for European industry, for SMEs, and of course for the contracting authorities. Our agenda is, as always, starting with news from the Cluster Collaboration Platform with Nina. Then we will hear from Henning from DG Grow, who's going to go into a bit more detail about that revision, what its aims are, how it's going to work, and what it means for everyone joining us today. Then, as always, we will have our panel discussion and wrapping up, as always, with our funding opportunities. Now, we're going to use Slido during our discussion today, but we'll start it before the panel. So do remember that you can answer those questions. There'll be a QR code that you can use to go directly to that Slido, or I'll give you a little bit more details when we get there. And we do want your thoughts because it's always very unscientific, but a very useful way to take the temperature of the room and understand people's concerns and interests. You can use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen, if you want to ask questions of our panelists during the discussion. And as always, use the chat to comment. We'll be sharing any links that are mentioned in the chat as well. If you want to speak, so to switch on your camera and your microphone and join the discussion with our panelists, ask them a question or make a point, raise your hand. Once again, there's the little icon at the bottom of your screen. You can do that, and then within a moment or two, one of the team will be in touch via the chat or via discussions to allow you to switch on your microphone and your camera. If you do so, of course, note that the session is recorded as always, and that the recording will be available after our event on the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. That's all our housekeeping for today. We'll get through all of those details and hopefully have a fruitful discussion over the next hour or so. But for now, I'm going to hand back over to Nina Hopman, who is going to give us the latest news from the ECCP.
Many thanks, Jennifer, and good morning to everyone. We are looking forward to the session today. But before we get started, we just like to share some news. First of all, the new call for expression of interest for the clusters meet regions has been published. This is an expression of interest which is initial and non-binding to potentially host future clusters meet region workshops this year and next year. Maybe some of you have been to a Clusters Meet Regions event before, maybe you haven't, but it's a well-established initiative that has been running for some years to bring together cluster organizations, regional and national authorities, and also other innovation and economic development stakeholders to discuss the role of clusters in the regional development for the twin transition, for smart specialization strategies, and to roll out the industrial transition pathways. So if you're interested in hosting a Clusters Meet Regions in your region, you can do so by expressing your interest, first of all, either the public or national, the regional or national public authority can submit this expression of interest, but also you as a cluster organization, the regional development agency, or if you're in a different business support organization, you can also submit it. But please be aware that the relevant regional authority need to be involved or aware of this initiative. So have a look. The details are published on the ECCP. And if you're interested, talk to your regional authority and submit your expression of interest. Then we invite you to also revisit the Euro clusters, because some of the calls that are available for SMEs offered by the Euro clusters are now starting. The Euro clusters are 16 initiative under for providing support for SMEs to foster innovation, uptake advanced technologies, build capacity in strategic sectors, and also drive the twin transition and resilience in our ecosystems. There are 8 initiatives that look more into the nets, that are more connected to net zero and also to raw materials. And then there are 8 other Euroclusters that cover different strategic sectors. We have discussed and presented them in previous EU cluster talks, so you can find the link to the slides and recording on the ECCP. So have a look at the Euroclusters and see whether there are any upcoming opportunities for your SMEs. In case you haven't done it yet, the ECCP Summary Report 2025 is also available, and you can have a look at it. It's a central contribution of the report to see how clusters advance in 3 core priorities of the EU Competitiveness Compass, which is closing the innovation gap, decarbonizing with competitiveness by enabling collective action, and also reducing excessive dependencies and increasing security by supporting value chain diversification. So it's available on the ECCP library. Have a look at the summary report. You find the link in the chat. And last but not least, there is also a new guide on European frameworks and initiatives supporting clusters in the green transition. It is about understanding regulations and initiatives and strategies that are laid out and summed up. Some of them you see on the screen. They are all described in this new guide, and it's helpful for organizations to get an overview of the policies and to see how to advance in the green transition. That's all from my side, and I hand over back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Nina. Lots of materials there for people to read after our event today. And as always, the links to those are in the chat, but you can find them all again by going to the ECCP online. We're going to talk, as we said today, all about public procurement and why those rules are being revised, what the revision means. And to present that for us and to talk us through what it all means is Henning Ehrenstein, who is head of the unit on public procurement within DG GROW in the European Commission. Henning, thank you so much for being here this morning. No slides, you're going to freestyle it and tell us everything we need to know. And I'm sure we will have comments in the chat, so feel free to have a look there while you're talking and see if you want to answer any of those questions. But over to you. Don't forget to unmute.
Good morning, everyone. Nice being here bright and early this morning with you to discuss and hear with you a little bit on public procurement and the revision of the public procurement directives that the Commission has announced for later this year, for the second quarter of this year, a set of directives that was last amended in 2014. And is used across the EU for the public procurement above certain value thresholds, below which national rules apply. So public procurement in the EU makes up about 15% of GDP. That's 2.5 trillion euros. About 20% of that is above the threshold and falls under EU law. This is about 660 billion euros, 44,000 public buyers purchasing through or via these rules across the EU, and about 160,000 companies awarded contracts. Sectors are infrastructure, works, for example, in transport, energy, health, education, among others. So the political guidance we have for the revision is to support, through the public procurement reform, a more efficient public investment in the Union, notably by simplifying the procedures for public procurement and making them digital by design. And I come to these points in a bit more detail later on. Secondly, announced by Commission President von der Leyen in her State of the Union speech in September, to incorporate a Made in Europe vision that is very much debated politically, as you probably know, and will also be an issue of discussion at tomorrow's meeting of the heads of government here in Belgium. Thirdly, to enhance the strategic role of public procurement. What we mean by this is to further use procurement to contribute to achieving policy objective, be they in terms of social or environmental sustainability, for example, or to support innovation. So the strategic role of public procurement as a further political direction and guidance that we have been given by the European Parliament, for example, but also the Council bringing together member states. So where do we stand in the process? We, in preparation of the revision, carried out a very thorough evaluation of the existing directives, what works, what doesn't work. This was a process that ran for about a year, included a public consultation that some of you may have contributed to last year, and we then published our evaluation report in October last year, that really shows in detail what works, what doesn't work, how have procurement markets and the application of this regulation been done over these years that they have been in force, and what are the lessons learned. That was the basis for a public consultation forward-looking on what the reform should tackle. This public consultation closed at the end of January. Together with a call for evidence, we got almost 2,000 responses, position papers, and inputs, which we are assessing now, as you can imagine. There's also a separate SME consultation that will close on 15 February, so it's still open. Those among you who are SMEs or have in your clusters SMEs are very welcome to contribute to this, and we can share a link to that, of course, as well. So this is a specific targeted consultation of how the rules impact SMEs and how we can devise the reform in a way that will support SME participation. The next step in our process will be to prepare an impact assessment. You're probably familiar with this, that we do this for all major initiatives at EU level, many member states, the same is done. So you identify what your policy objectives are, your different policy options, and assess advantages and disadvantages of each of them in order to then prepare for the actual legal proposal. Our timeline is to have the impact assessment completed in April to be able to come out with the legal proposal before the summer. So on substance, on our 3-4 main pillars that I set out, clearly we are receiving a lot of demands to simplify the existing rules. The evaluation has also shown that there is significant scope for further simplification and making more flexible the existing procedures. We are receiving a lot of concrete inputs on how exactly this can be done. And I think what we see quite clearly is that the more we can digitize and create an online marketplace for procurement, come to this in a moment, the more we will be able to actually simplify the procedures, both for the public buyers and of course for economic operators participating in procurement procedures. So we see this happening also at national level. About 1/3 of all member states have created an online procurement marketplace where you don't only, like in our EU TED system, have the publications of call for tenders, but you also have the opportunity for companies to transmit their bids and for then awards to take place, and also a monitoring of the project implementation to take place. So companies, for example, register in these marketplaces, and then they stay registered and don't have to resubmit for every public procurement procedure all their documentation. It stays in the system. The system can even be connected to other IT systems that check whether the economic operators are actually eligible to participate in procurement, whether they meet the relevant exclusion criteria or not. So there is quite some ways to reduce the paperwork that we see happen at national level. As I said, about 1/3 of member states have introduced such integrated system for the entire territory. Of course, us looking at it from a European level, there may be a strong interest in ensuring the networking and interoperability and talking to each other of these systems, so that if you are a company from I don't know, the Czech Republic, and you register in the Czech system, you can, through the Czech system, also participate in a procurement in Austria. Just one example. So the more we can advance on the digitization front, the more we will be able to also reduce all the paperwork in all of the ex-ante procedures that were created. Why? That were created in order to safeguard against irregular practices that unfortunately do occur. But the more we can safeguard through data transparency and analysis ex post against such practices, the more we can also reduce these ex ante safeguards. So that's why digitization and the idea of these marketplaces and administrative simplification for us really hang together. On strategic procurement, this was the main innovation in the 2014 reform to allow and promote social and green procurement, innovation procurement, for which there's a specific innovation procedure, which the evaluation showed doesn't work very well. So there'll be certainly scope there to improve that. And here the key political question will be whether we will continue to enhance and promote strategic procurement or to make this in parts at least mandatory. There's very different political views on this, as we saw from discussions in the European Parliament last year. We know that similar debates happen in many member states, including some where reforms are currently being discussed in Parliament. And these political discussions we also expect here at the European level. The main political attention for now is on Made in Europe and how to design and define that. My reading is that whereas a few years ago we would have had a discussion whether there should be Made in Europe or not, the discussion is now much more how it should be designed and calibrated. So what is Europe? Is it only the EU? Is it wider than the EU? What about our international trading partners outside of Europe, some of which we have free trade agreements with others, WTO procurement partnerships. So the geographic scope is a key question. And the second key question is what products or services to cover, where you have different schools of thought. One saying this should be limited to really economic and national security relevant products or sectors, where there is security risks for our countries and our societies and our economies, when we have too much of an exposure. Others would argue that beyond security, this is also an industrial policy tool for strategic sectors to protect those. And this is very much an ongoing discussion that is many, many levels about our civil servants' pay grade. As I said, we are watching with great interest, evidently, what will come out of these discussions on this item at the meeting of President von der Leyen and the heads of governments here in Belgium on Thursday. It's a discussion that, of course, also takes place in other fora, such as another context, such as the draft Industrial Accelerator Act that the Commission is planning to come out with soon. But you see Made in Europe provisions being discussed in Council based on a Commission proposal in relation to critical medicines, for example. There is a wide expectation that in the future this may also be discussed in the context of future cloud legislation. So this is a subject that we see in many different fora at the moment. And on all of these issues, I'd be very interested to hear your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Henning. A lot there to unpack as we look at this revision. And as you say, meetings this week, even today up the road in Antwerp, we're going to see Commission President von der Leyen, some key commissioners and members of the heads of state there to discuss with businesses what all of this means. So lots and lots to unpack. So let's start our Slido poll. You can go to slido.com on your browser and you can enter public procurement as the code to get into our discussion today, or you can get your smart device and scan the QR code that you see there on the screen. Our first question that we're asking this morning is, how relevant is public procurement to your organization or to your members? There you see three options: very relevant, somewhat relevant, or not very relevant. I am imagining there's not going to be many saying not very relevant. If you've taken the time to join us this morning, it's certainly of some relevance indeed. With 10 votes already, very relevant is absolutely the most popular answer. So we can give a few more minutes. I see we can maybe get up to about 20 votes. I know it takes a little bit of time to go to Slido and get that all connected, but it's useful for our panelists to know just what level of importance you're placing on public procurement, because while it's important to the economy as a whole, it means different things to different sizes of organizations and different stages of their development. So 72% so far saying it's very relevant, 75% somewhat relevant for 25%. So the majority, 3/4 of those joining today, think it's very, very relevant to either themselves or to their members. Let's have a look at the next question, one that we're going to try and answer on the panel as well. And that is, what is the biggest challenge in public procurement today? So too much bureaucracy, too slow procedures, too much focus on lowest price, high entry barriers for SMEs, not enough space for innovation and new solutions, or other, and you can go and specify in the chat if you want to say other. I'm thinking all of these are probably certain challenges. We know that certainly the revision is going to try and focus on those challenges and make it easier for SMEs in particular, but for anyone who's looking to work in the public procurement space. Okay, we've got 6% of others. I don't see any others written in the chat yet, but we're seeing that too much focus on lowest price and high entry barriers for SMEs are up in front. I think slow procedures is not getting any votes so far, which is interesting. Although I suppose perhaps that falls under too much bureaucracy because that can slow things down. But too much focus on lowest price seems to be everyone's biggest concern or biggest challenge. So then we're going to have our word cloud. So it's more than clicking, it's typing in what is the one change you would like to see in EU procurement rules. So I'm guessing based on that previous poll that less focus on lowest price might be one. Perhaps you'd like to see streamlining. Perhaps you'd like to see more innovation. I know people are typing, so we'll wait just a moment to see what they're saying. What is the one change you would like to see in EU procurement rules? So negotiation procedure as standard procedure. Innovation allows strategic autonomy. Bigger access to quality products, access or accessibility, more flexibility, EU preference. I guess that's coming back to Henning's Made in Europe point. Simplification of procedures, bigger access to quality products, two-phase application, innovation procurement, innovation, more innovation. Okay, I think if we all had those written in exactly the same way, that would increase the size of that. I think probably innovation, one of the highest there. Regionality as a criteria and the leveraging of existing certification. Carbon footprint, I presume that's relevance of carbon footprint. Yes, there, innovation has been consolidated into the main point there that everyone is wanting to see a change in. I so presume that means that more innovation, more facility for innovation, and it looks like access is also a big one there. Only ask once in terms of documentation, this once only method of doing things. So I see faster procedure as well, similar recognition of labels as in the EU eco level. Okay, we will leave that co-design more and more with people, but quality and innovation and access standing out there. So innovation and access looking to be the two biggest points. So we will be asking our panelists what the biggest change they would like to see at the end of our discussion. But for now, let me invite our panel speakers to switch on their cameras. We have joining us this morning Esther Davanzo, who is Senior European Affairs Coordinator from France Digital. Jorge Gonzalez is Director of TIC Biomed. Montse Daban is Strategic Foresight and International Relations Director at Biocat. And Yanis Zormpas is Principal at Boston Consulting Group. A very good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. Let's think about the middle Slido question that came up there. We're going to do a tour de table and ask you to sort of introduce your opening perspective on that. But tell me as well what you feel are the biggest challenges in public procurement today. Yanis, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and good morning to everybody. So, just a little context of who I am and what I'm doing. I'm working on a large program for DG Grow and a SMEA called Innovation Procurement Hubs, which is essentially an effort to help public authorities address challenges they have on implementing innovation procurement. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because we have talked with a lot of demand-side stakeholders on exactly what they feel is, the biggest challenge that they are facing. We have also interviewed suppliers on more, let's say, targeted aspects of it, but seems to be a consensus on both sides that there are, of course, challenges everywhere in terms of how we introduce innovation procurement into overall national and sectoral strategies, on how bureaucratic or administrative the procedures are, on whether the legal framework allows flexibility, on whether people have the skills and the capabilities to run innovation procurement, right? Or whether there is steady funding and a budgeting process that allows for more flexibility on innovation procurement because of the type of procurement and the characteristics that it has as a process. My personal understanding is that a lot of this links back to culture and mindset about what innovation procurement is, what it exists to address, and how we need to approach it in terms of the problems and the issues that we're trying to solve, right? So it's also a matter of understanding how to take measured risk and when innovation procurement actually serves to solve societal needs that cannot be solved with the solutions and the products and the services that we currently have, right? It's more of an understanding what we're trying to achieve with it and being a little bit more open to try different things than what we have in place, right? It's also sometimes a little bit of a misunderstanding of how it differs with traditional procurement. Issues can be varied. They can be linked to many different aspects of what procurement actually tries to do. But I think the root of it all is a better understanding and more flexibility in trying to implement it to achieve more innovative and more, let's say, results that are more well adapted to the needs that we have, right? Being a little bit more eager to experiment in a controlled, measured way.
Thank you. Montse, let me come to you. First of all, tell us a little bit about what you're working on, but also maybe your initial thoughts on what the big challenges are in public procurement.
Well, thank you very much. Happy to be here also to share these thoughts about this relevant matter. My name is Montse Daban. I work at Biocat, which is a cluster organization in Catalonia. It fosters and drives the life sciences ecosystem in the region. And we've been there for 20 years. So we've seen the market evolve and the industry evolve quite a lot. And in these recent years, we're seeing this alignment between so important pieces of regulation that is going now on at European level, and this important revision of the regulatory landscape. And what we see here, given the fact that we are looking at a very highly challenging and scenario for Europe's competitiveness in 2026 and beyond, this agenda that is evolving so unprecedentedly, I could say, I think that it is it also involves a lot of challenges. And from the perspective that we have from the life sciences and health innovation clusters, which is clearly part of the Made in Europe vision as one of the strategic sectors, what we see is that main shortcomings that we are seeing in the framework is, for example, that sometimes it is hard to navigate for innovators, those that we most want to succeed, because SMEs in those enabling technologies like digital health or in our area, synthetic biology, AI, now with the ATMPs, the ATMP manufacturing, etc., all that, these solutions rarely fit the categories that the traditional tenders assume. So for our innovators, this is really difficult. So the value sometimes besides that is interconnected. So digital tools depends on data quality, and now we have the EHDS. So all that is setting a scene that is actually challenging for the traditional procurement tools. That on one side. The other one that we could see also is the fragmentation we've always been talking about. So this different interpretation of procurement that we see across Europe, and often even differently in the matter of life sciences between hospitals in the same country, in the same region, this is very hard for innovators. And what can be sufficient evidence? Evidence is a word that is so important in this matter, and it gets through data. So what counts as sufficient in one place might be irrelevant or not enough in another one. So for some areas like the advanced therapies that are now a big focus on the Biotech Act as well that we mentioned, for most of the countries and regions, this is also very challenging. There's regulations like the exemption, the hospital extension rules that apply differently. So all that sets this fragmentation that is another of the big shortcomings that we have seen for years. And the third one that I would like to mention is that there are tools, always there have been tools like PCP or PPI or this partnership that have always been there, but they're not sufficiently used. So not because there's a lack of interest in that, and I know that Jorge is also going to address this because we have been discussing about that a lot, but also because there's a lack of capacity, templates are not in place, the guidance is lacking, the confidence. So those are instruments that require conditions still exceptional for most public systems, in the sense that they are prepared to manage risk, but usually avoiding it. And it's not inherent to the procurement that most of these innovators require in their environment. So these are, for me, the three main shortcomings. But this is very interesting how at regional level or at country level, there's already been in place some examples on how this can work. And Jorge and I at that level are also very much aligned. So some funneling, some fast track systems that can help activate the most advanced procurement scenarios for some companies that are very welcome also if they are seen across the EU with this revision that is being undertaken. So these three shortcomings that are also in the Slido, and these solutions from our side.
Thank you, Montse, and we'll come into a little bit more about the revision in a moment. But Jorge, let's hear from you. Tell us what you're working on, of course, then build on what Montse was saying. I saw you nodding along.
All right, of course, we agree a lot, Montse and I. So I'm Jorge González, I'm the director of TBMed. We are a cluster that we promote demand-driven innovation and procurement of innovation. We participate a lot in European projects. I want to address three issues that we see a lot. I mean, the first one is the famous valley of death of pilots. Okay, so for example, the Commission is paying for all these different transitions, these innovation journeys, and we always fail at the end. We know that the solution, a pilot, is working, and now we need to move it into the customers, into the procurers, the ones that have actually participated in the development of the solution, and then nothing happens. Okay, it goes to the valley of death with all the frustration and all the waste of taxpayers' money. So that's one of the problems. And what we see there is that there is no clear rules in order how to do this transition, okay? Because you have worked with a supplier and then the procurer, and there are different interpretations, and that's a huge barrier for moving from one to the other. The second point I just want to stress, and here I am just to put problems on the table. That's my easy job, okay? How to do things is very complex, and leave Henning, his team, to do that. But I just want to highlight the importance of the first customer concept is for an SME, for a startup, okay? To have an early first customer, that a public procurer gets your solution and is a showroom for the rest of the world is critical. So if something could be done, so in a risk-averse culture as public procurement, to facilitate this first of class, this getting startups, now that we are going to have a common definition of a startup across Europe, that the startups are, better say, that the procurers can easily buy from a startup that is something new, that is not in the market, and brings that credibility, that trust from other procurers. That's a huge for startups. And the last point is what Monse just mentioned, leaner instruments for public procurement. It is possible, okay? Current innovation, Alliance for Innovation, Pre-Commercial Procurement, Public Procurement Instrumentos, they are a killer, okay? They can be very good for big projects, but what about the smaller projects? For example, with digital, they are not there because procurers only go for the big money, okay? Because that's where the public funding is in terms, for example, from the European Commission. Then we get into these perverse circles where we make projects very big just to get the money. And that should not be it. We participate in projects like InnoBuyer, InnoMatch. We have leaner, faster, more agile, less overhead mechanisms that at the end of the day help the procurer to acquire innovation. But the current instruments are too burdensome. And as Monse was there, you can see that the interest of the procurers is there, but the failure is more in the modeling of the instruments. So I don't want to abuse your time. So these three main points help to cross the valley of death of pilots, help SMEs and startups to get a first public customer, and think about leaner public procurement of innovation instruments.
Thank you, and we will talk about all of those things in detail. Esther, France Digital, what is your focus, and what do you think are the big shortcomings at the moment?
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for having us. France Digital, it's an association representing startups, scale-ups, but also incubators and investors. So the entire, let's say, value chain of innovation. We only represent French and European entities. We are independent from non-European firms. And so interesting discussion here. Thanks a lot, Henning, for your introductory speech. Very interested also in this online marketplace idea, and willing to exchange views on that moving forward further. To answer to your question, Jennifer, I completely agree with the Slido's answers. Too much focus on lower price and access that is limited, especially for SMEs and startups. And so the main maybe points to tackle are this shift that needs to be taken from the most economically advantageous tender to a more strategic approach. And Henning already said it. It's not about whether to do it or not. This European preference, the question is how to define what is made in Europe, what is Europe, what sector do we consider. And so I'm also more than happy to discuss more about this point. We have been focusing on it quite a lot within France Digital, exchanging with our members, especially in the digital sector. Value chains are global, but at the same time, we see that helping made in Europe firms will definitely be a major lever for the entire economy and competitiveness to grow. And the second point is indeed these structural obstacles that startups face when accessing public procurement due to complex procedures and financial and administrative requirements that are disproportionate for these kind of companies. Just to give you an example, I was discussing with a startup that used to work with the Commission for a quite long period of time, around 1 year. It was kind of a test project, so it was like a proper procedure needed to be carried out. And so a call for tenders was published, and actually in the call for tenders, there were some requirements that the firm, the startup that the Commission had been working with for a quite important period of time could not meet. So actually, the firm could not work with the Commission anymore, even if actually the contract was a positive one. I mean, the relationship they had before was working well, both for the Commission and for the users that were getting advantage of this platform for Commission purposes. So indeed, there are quite a lot of topics that can be mentioned, but just thinking about timelines, for a startup, everything moves quite fast, but at the same time, they need the resources and the knowledge to answer to public procurement tenders. And so if we have very asymmetric timelines for answering to a call and then waiting for the response that is usually takes quite a lot of time, it can be very difficult for a startup even to try to answer to a tender. Track record criteria, of course, can be penalizing for these kind of firms, financial capacity requirement. And so here I completely agree with what Jorge said about this first customer idea and the risk-adverse culture that maybe needs to be reviewed also in Europe. Indeed, public procurement is a major lever for helping these kind of firms to have a first customer or an anchor also that is then very valuable for other potential customers. And if I think about startups in particular, also for investors. So it's really a virtuous circle that can be made and fed by this kind of approach. And I also agree with the idea that we don't necessarily need to have very big projects. And I know that, for instance, geographical distribution is a key question for the European Union, and I completely understand it. But sometimes we create consortia just to meet these criteria, and at the end of the day, they are not generally made by synergies that are logical. And so at the end of the day, we build a very big project, but also a slow one and not very efficient one. And so maybe streamlining innovation in the entire public procurement rule book and also procedures may be beneficial for both actually the public powers and the firms providing services and products to public entities.
Thank you very much, Esther. Henning, since I still have you here, perhaps there's a point to be made that legislation is not the answer to everything. You mentioned that in the chat, but perhaps you could expand a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there is, and it was clear from the findings of the evaluation also, there is things that we can improve and that require a change to the existing legislation. Like if we want to simplify some of the procurement procedures, or for example, there has been a very limited use of the evaluation showed of the innovation partnerships, which is the innovation specific procedure, and there are specific issues here. So if we do want to improve this, this in part requires amendments to the existing legislation. So part of the answer is legislative. But very importantly, we find not all is. We are doing, as Yanis and others said, a lot of work with stakeholders on platforms to support what we call the professionalization of the capacities of public buyers. And that has a lot of success. And this does not require always legislative changes to give more guidance, to give templates, to give example contract clauses that can be used. to offer trainings. So I think that part of the answer also lies in non-legislative measures. I think we do need both, and if our current plans will materialize, there will, in addition to the legal proposal, also be a communication with actions that we envisage of non-legislative nature.
Well, let's talk about, Montse, how public procurement directives could more easily stimulate this investment, stimulate this scale up and avoid the valley of death that Jorge mentioned, and the market uptake of innovative solutions. Because these are the outcomes that we want to see. And how do we actually use public procurement to stimulate that?
Well, thank you. That is a relevant subject, because at the end of the day, what we want is this reform to help to increase the outcomes of the innovation and how this can reach and be adopted. So with some predictability, actually, because we have to see the consistent demand signals and alignment with regulation, for example, having these accelerators. So these ideas that we were seeing in the talks that Jorge and Esther also announced or started to define on how these first buyers or this way of SMEs to reach a mostly facilitated pathway. So this could be perfectly one way of clarifying on supporting this funding, this facilitated access. So we have to align the approvals with the legislation. We have to modernize these requirements. So all these instruments might probably create this momentum that we are seeing for this. So if Europe wants more investment to be dedicated to that, it must offer some predictability in levels of adoption and some rewards, for example. In manufacturing, that is very let's say, very much improving the outcome. So with these rewards, this coordinated demand that we are seeing here. So for us, these ways of coordinating the procurement that we are also seeing could be a good way when several regions can procure together, and this could be a way to increase this predictability for the SMEs. So this is the mechanism by which this financing of the innovation that procurers need to adopt could reach and allowing buyers to purchase these capabilities more based in the value of the innovation, that the price that we were mentioning at the beginning. So I think that we also could rely on some pilots that can be performed at some regional level on some particular highly innovative enabling technologies for some strategic sectors. Those could be perfectly examples on how this investment can be channeled and fueled into the innovation procurement. And also, again, going back to the use of these PCP tools that have been underused, and having a better way of increasing this access to innovation to some particular, let's say, highly ingrained procurement scenarios. That we really need that for this innovation that is going to align to this made in Europe competitiveness that we are looking for.
Yanis, same question to you, because this revision, it's not just about cutting the chaff or cutting the red tape and making things more streamlined. It's also about going further than that and actually using public procurement as a lever for innovation. What are the ways in which we could do that?
Yeah, I would really double down on what was mentioned before by Montse. I think more collaboration is the key here, right? It also solves partially, it's not the only thing, but it solves partially what Jorge mentioned about the size of the tickets, right? Now we may have public authorities public buyers that want to try their hand at innovation procurement, but since, of course, there is some experimentation, some let's say exploration during innovation procurement, usually what happens is that we start small, right? But we can increase by collaborating, and we can also increase capacity and capability building by collaborating, right? It allows both public buyers to understand what are the practices already in place, learn from others, understand whether similar challenges, similar products, similar efforts have been undertaken already somewhere else in Europe, and learn from there, or at least not start from scratch. It also allows them to understand if there is a similar need somewhere else in Europe, and collaborate together to increase the size of the ticket, to align the practices, to align the requirement as much as possible, and to make also their procurement more attractive for suppliers, because the ticket is going to be bigger, and because suppliers understand that this is not a need of a particular, let's say, public buyer organization, municipality, or whatever. It's something that seems to be more of a trend across different actors in Europe, right? So it allows for increased visibility. It allows for increased harmonization of relevant practices, processes, rules. It allows for collaboration, cross-border and cross-sector, right? And it boosts capacity building. It accelerates the development of skills required by allowing people to discuss, to align on needs, to align on practices, to align on needs, and understand how to engage the market more effectively. I think all of these parts are equally important. In some cases, this can be addressed by legislation. I think not all of them, and not on a practical scale, because the legislation provides a framework, but you need also the processes, you need the tools, you need the mentality to engage in this kind of setup.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we talk about when we talk about cutting red tape is also the idea of cutting redundant duplication of efforts. And that dovetails very well with innovation, which is often about addressing a problem in a new and different way. But Esther, alongside innovation, we want to stimulate innovation, but that often means stimulating investment. And what are the ways that public procurement can help do that alongside stimulating innovation?
Well, it has been already said, but as Henning also pointed out, public procurement at European level represents 15% of the union's GDP. So it's huge, and indeed, if it is used for the European economy, it can be an extremely advantageous leverage for competitiveness. So maybe indeed the idea is how to favor European firms and how to define them. We saw also that Commissioner Séjourné published an op-ed and that more than 1,000 European companies across member states signed it to call for a European preference to a made in EU kind of leverage for firms. And so maybe a way to define it is a very, very clear and simple definition of a European company, and a primary and excluding criterion should be that the parent company must be based in Europe. And then we need to define what Europe is, right? Are we only considering the European Union, like-minded countries, like closed countries that are at the border of the EU, etc. And so this need to be done by the legislators. But indeed, this binary criterion would allow for non-European entities not to circumvent it, and at the same time, it's very transparent for companies. At the same time, we know that, as I said before, in the digital sector, the value chain is really global at the moment. And so not to penalize innovation, we should also take into consideration the fact that a European preference must not discriminate against, for instance, non-European investors, because we know that at the moment, growth capital in Europe is quite limited compared to other parts of the world. And so a lot of investments come from outside of Europe at the moment. At the same time, also 100% local content must be avoided in order not to force European companies, especially at the end of the value chain, to have all their infrastructure behind to be completely European, which is not possible at the moment, even if the long-term objective is, of course, to have all the different bricks of the value chain made in Europe and strong within our own economy. And maybe also a strategic approach would be to consider this European preference for the entire digital sector. Henning was also mentioning questions that are asked or looked into, whether to consider only the security sector or critical also. This is a terms that comes very often, critical sectors. What is critical needs to be defined. The digital sector is very wide and interconnected. And I think that favoring all the different blocks of the digital value chain would help the entire economy at the end of the day to be stronger, without, of course, forcing every block to be linked to other bricks that need to be European too. I don't know if this is clear, but I think this is really a levy that can be used and can have very big impacts and a positive one.
Well, the digital sector, of course, is quite unique when it comes to strategic autonomy. And in fact, we do, of course, already have the NIS directive, which goes some way to defining what is critical infrastructure and where we need to be protecting that from a security and strategic autonomy point of view. Jorge, coming to you, I mean, and staying perhaps, if you like, with the competitiveness angle, how should a European preference mechanism work, and what does Made in Europe actually mean to you?
To be completely honest, Jennifer, I don't know so much about this topic, but if I may, I would like to refer to what Henning was mentioned before about non-legislative measures. And I think I can bring from the bottom up 3 learnings that we have got. One is that there is no clarity about what to do this transition, for example, between research and procurement. So we have been questioned that a company that works in an innovation project can actually be eligible for a procurement. Okay, so we still get questions like that, even from people that they are supposed to know. Of course they can, but there needs to be some rules. There have to be some kind of disclosures. The problem is in the details. Like, okay, what is the level of granularity of that disclosure? What is something that is transparent and fair for the other economic players, but at the same time that you protect the IP of the company, and very important, it's convenient for the procurer as well, because otherwise you say, okay, it's too much hassle, I don't want to get to that. So if you just bring clarity and you help to address the myths and the traditions that are not helping, that's not legislation, but it will really help a lot because you create a safe space for procurers. The second thing you were mentioning about training. Every single report from the World Bank, everything says we need to capacitate them. Now, we are in a project called No Support. We are paid to deliver that training. It's a nightmare to recruit procurers, because if you only deliver training, capacity building per se, the traditional way, people is always very busy. It's not a priority. So what we have learned compared to other projects that we participate is that you need to do hands-on training. That means that you embed the action within the training. So there is some, for example, cascade funding, where the procurers are giving also some money and some support to learn on the go, okay? Just pure theoretical exchange of knowledge doesn't work, at least as our experience. Hopefully other people have succeeded better. In our experience, the best thing is the blended approach. And the last thing I want to say is that DigiGrow has this procurement, but also the competitiveness fund. If you guys synergize, you will multiply each other. And this is a huge opportunity that you have, that you can do a lot of things for acquiring innovation from the DigiGrow competitiveness, apart from what DGRTD is doing. So please, please, please combine the two levels that you have now, Competitiveness One and the new Directive of Procurement, because it will be a multiplying effect if you do that properly.
From my talks with people inside the Commission, they are always striving to do this, and it's not always easy. As you say, sometimes when you're fighting fires on a daily basis, it can be difficult to take a step back. Montse, your hand is raised.
Yeah, because I think that this subject about the European preference mechanism is really relevant, and it has to be treated with all the precaution or all the consideration that it deserves, because it should be designed as a targeted resilience and competitiveness tool more than a protectionist measure, in terms that it's, of course, something that has to be effective and legally robust. It must be precise in the sense that it has to be objective, and it should probably address those sectors that are more strategic, or technologies also, but they should be selected based on transparent and evidence-based criteria. So I think this is a really, really relevant subject that has a strong impact on the supply chains that we can use and we have to face in this procurement environment. This is really important. The mechanism also has to operate through, I think, through some award criteria based on resilience, for example, and not exclusion. I think this is very important differences that have to be applied. For example, there are sensitive sectors and where a minimum EU added value has to be taken into consideration. So all those things probably link to probably design, which is the way in which you should apply this mechanism. And it should be, of course, linked to some reciprocity, because otherwise we will fall in the other side of what we really need to do. So, and there's clusters and industrial ecosystems there can play a role, a very relevant role in trying to, for example, targeting clear defined sectors and technologies that are going to be very important for this European competitiveness, without falling on the side that could be also not the best scenario for all the technology in the sectors.
Well, I see Monica Antonovich is asking a question to our panelists and making the point that in Poland, we face a significant challenge regarding public procurement for cluster-specific services, such as developing specialized cybersecurity frameworks for members. That, despite having a national certification system, public auditors often block tenders restricted to certain certified coordinators, citing open competitiveness rules. They fail to recognize the unique trust-based expertise required to manage some of these ecosystems. Monica's question is, how are other countries reconciling EU competition law with the need for cluster-specific specialization? Are there proven legal workarounds or specific criteria that allow for prioritizing certified cluster coordinators in public tenders without being flagged by controlling bodies? I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to answer that, or perhaps anyone who is a participant has some advice for Monica. You can feel free to put that in the chat there. But staying broadly in this area, Yanis, and talking about, if you like, the European preference mechanism.
European preference, yes. And I do have a strong opinion on that, because I really, really don't believe that anything that revolves around protectionism is going to work. It won't work, right? What, for me, European preference means is, first of all, lower the barriers for innovative companies across Europe to address the market across Europe, because we are facing a very, very big challenge. We can have a very effective, very innovative SME in Slovakia that will never go and participate in public procurement in France because of language barriers, because it doesn't know the processes, because it doesn't know the legislation, right? And the more we are fragmented on that, the less probable it is that we will find, let's say, a European supplier to meet the needs we have, because they won't want to engage. This is not something that, for example, American startups have to face in a large market of 340 million people, right? The other thing is scale, right? And this is also something that we need to have in mind in terms of, yes, we do have a lot of very successful, very innovative startups, SMEs. We need to help them achieve the scale to be competitive. Not overnight, but we need to help them do that, right? Through participation, partnerships, investment, what have you. We need to increase that kind of collaboration and that kind of scale up. And the third is really about competitiveness in the sense of, if we are not giving enough information, enough insight to these companies about what the public needs, if we publicize those needs, we wait until the tender comes, right? Innovation, research is never going to be aligned, and it's never going to be, let's say, as clear cut up on and well adjusted to those needs as it should be, and as it to enable a European preference. And this is the issue here, because we can have this kind of realignment and make European preference not just, okay, I will choose the European firm because it's a European firm. I will choose the European firm because its research and development and innovation is already in line with European values, European needs, the European industry and the European market. That's where really this will make a difference, right? So scale, lower barriers and alignment in internal legislation, practices, processes, and alignment, co-design, co-development, really early visibility on the needs and the key requirements of society, public buyers. This is, I think, what really enables, we can have all the legal and all the regulatory stipulations we want, but unless we make it scalable, competitive, and aligned to the needs, it won't work.
I mean, absolutely. When it comes to spending public money, transparency, accountability are obviously center. And of course, if we have the best solution, then we don't need to look at preferencing. And that's not to say it's protectionist. There are also arguments to say that, you mentioned the US, Americans are less worried about putting themselves first, to look the other direction. China has its own preferential treatment. So in Europe, perhaps we're sometimes a little bit shy to say we want to preference things because we're afraid of being accused of being protectionist, which isn't what this is about, and certainly not what the revision is about. So let me then, as a final quick question, ask, what are the opportunities that the revision is creating? I see there in the chat, you can see that there is a survey that people can click the link, fill that in. It's been shared there. I know Henning shared it initially, but now it's the ongoing SME survey in preparation for the public procurement reform. So that's a chance for everyone to have their say. Public consultation is always important when we come to these sorts of revisions. But Jorge, from your perspective, this revision, does it create special new opportunities? And also, as a closing thought, what will be the one change you'd like to see within this revision?
Okay, of course it does. And I don't envy Henning's work at all, because I think it is not easy, especially with the member states, the parliament, and so on. So I don't think it will be easy to put the sticks to say, no, you cannot buy the cheapest, you cannot put price out of the equation, you have to buy innovation. That is not possible. But what you can do is create spaces for the believers, for the ones that want to do things, for the trailblazers. Give them safety spaces in order to try things and to show the others that it is possible, and to put these lessons learned on the table. If you ask me, for me, everything that helps to transition for this valley of death, okay, to find this kind of first customer, they are all related, by the way. They can be, and it will be not just one measure. There are special, small things that you can tweak into the legislation to do that. But everything, again, that helps to save from something that is innovation, how to incorporate that into the public entities. That's what, at least myself, I'm dreaming of every day.
I see Lucia Sell is saying that actually, Yanis, indeed, it's about pre-communication effort, and suggesting perhaps AI could help in this area. Of course, we're not exactly leading in the AI battle either, but that's a discussion for another day. Montse, let me come to you, a brief closing remark in terms of the revision and what you'd like to see.
Yeah, that's hopefully what we would like to see there is, for example, that we that it allows access to larger cross-border markets. This is something that we really have been looking forward for the innovators. So more contracts now are under EU rules, and SMEs can compete at multi-country tenders. That could be ideal at that level. So probably some more innovation-friendly contracting, for sure. This is something that we have been also seeing that SMEs need for years. Some premiums for sustainability and resilience. We all talk about that. So we have to go for this and incentivizing these practices, seeing also that early adopters, like we mentioned, and Jorge mentioned that before, and pilot opportunities have a place there. So the new solutions being co-developed with public authorities, that is something that could also stimulate innovation and specifically fill some gaps, existing gaps, and some strategic industrial support. So these incentives can directly support procurement to companies that strengthen EU value chains. That is very important to keep these value chains. So one inspiration that I would like to see here is that some scoring uplift within strategic sectors in some tenders. So some scale-up quota, something that can also stimulate scaling up and adoption of these innovations through procurement in public sectors. That was an inspiration for the
It's more than one thing, but we all have a long list of things.
I mean, you asked, and there's a lot.
Yanis, I know I'm conscious of time, so if you can distill it into maybe one or two things you would like to see from the revision.
I think from my side, 2 points. Legislation should enable more flexibility around both the rules, but also the process, what is needed, and what, as Henning mentioned, what we can do exposed to ease the process of selection. The second thing is it also needs to incentivize people to actually use innovation procurement when it's really needed, and make sure that, when we have to have clear criteria on when such a process should be employed. This will also give people a certain, let's say, confidence to make sure that they are compliant and that they are in a position to use the tools that are they're available to them. For me, these are the 2 main points. Of course, there are many more, but these 2 are essential. Thank you.
Thank you. And Esther, same final wrap up from you, please.
I'll be brief. I would say EU added value. I completely agree with avoiding protectionism. This is not desirable, nor a positive approach. But I would say how to help the European economy and competitiveness. So maybe consider the share of employees based in Europe, research and development activities in Europe, intellectual property, environmental and social criteria, EU values, without, of course, burdening too much the administrative processes. But maybe also someone spoke about resilience, and this is completely, absolutely key, especially nowadays in the geopolitical context. So EU added value.
Thank you very much. I think that's a good point to leave it on. And Henning, hopefully this is useful for you as well as you go ahead in your work. That's great for our panel discussion. Thank you so much. I think we've really whetted people's appetites and stimulated some discussion in the chat as well. For now, I'm going to hand back to Nina to give us an update on what are the funding opportunities.
Many thanks, Jennifer, and many thanks to all the speakers. Great discussion to follow. And as Lucia also said in the chat, great to revisit. Later on, we will publish the recording very shortly after the closing of the session. Just some final funding opportunities that we would like to point out that might be interesting for you. First of all, the new call for the Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs, Local Partners. ESMEA has opened the call for proposals to select intermediate organizations that will run the Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs program locally. And here we're looking for applicants that have experience in supporting businesses and must, of course, meet the eligibility and compliance requirements that are set out in the call. You will find the link in the chat and also here in the slide that you can look into what are those requirements. The proposals must be submitted by the 21st of April, and there will be an info session on the 26th of February. So if you're interested, attend this info session to get all the details on the call. The program itself will support border exchanges between new and aspiring entrepreneurs and experienced host entrepreneurs in the different participating countries, with the aim to boost skills from entrepreneurs, but also to have internationalization activities and to support the SME competitiveness. There's another call open that is called European Startup and Scale-Up Hubs Pilot, and this is an action that will pilot a network of around 10 to 18 European startups and scale-ups hubs, which should be entities deeply integrated with leading research, technology, and higher education institutions, and have track records in venture building, scaling, and investment attraction. The activities from these hubs should be accelerating market expansion of European deep tech startups across the EU regions, establish a robust and pan-European alliances of top-tier tech startups and scale-up hubs embedded in this ecosystem, enable cross-border access to infrastructure, support scaling, but also integrating these hubs into the Europe-wide collaboration network, as well as mobilize greater private and public capital into deep tech ventures across the participating hubs. The deadline is the 10th of March. You see the topic ID here in the screen and the link in the chat. And the I3 instrument, the Interregional Innovation Investments, has the strand to be open, which is related to capacity building. And this is aimed to strengthen the capacity to deliver concrete interregional innovation investments within EU value chain, especially in the lesser developed regions in Europe. And involved SMEs shall also have the advanced capacity to cooperate in the value chains and attract private investments. This call is aimed to improve the capacity, especially of public authorities and innovation intermediaries, such as clusters, to support the companies in the identification of investment portfolios at an interregional scale. The deadline is the 19th of March. Same, the topic ID is on the screen and the link in the chat. That's all, and thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, Nina. Yes, things to look out for coming up. All the links are in the chat, and of course you can find them all on the recording. But don't forget, do register for the next talks. On the 25th of February, there will be a discussion on delivering impact for Europe's clusters, the ECCP activities, results, a good overview there. And then on the 4th of March, we'll be zooming in on the Industrial Accelerator Act and speeding up strategic projects. Of course, you can always continue the discussion on LinkedIn. The link is there, and you can find the ECCP general discussion group to continue some of those discussions and maybe develop some more of the questions that we've had. And there are also lots of other ways to follow along on the website, on social media. You can see all the links there. Use the hashtag ECCP or EU Clusters Talks so that everyone can find each other. Charlotte is asking, will the recording of the webinar be available? Yes, as always, it will be available there on the clustercollaboration.eu website. So no problem finding it. We will get the information to you through all these different channels. Thank you very much for your attention today, and hope to see you again some Wednesday morning soon.